Hi there, and welcome to Broadcast Interrupted. I'm Chirag, and with me, as always, the wonderful.
Andy.
Hi, Andy. We interrupt this broadcast to bring to you our episode with Isha Bhatt. Isha Bhatt is the Director of Product Management at YouTube Commerce. She's based in San Francisco, and for over 22 years now, she has witnessed the beginnings and the rise of some of the biggest tech companies that we know and cherish even today. She has been in a leadership position in one of these companies for the past few years. And what was very interesting about the conversation was how she described what it means to be a leader in one of these tech companies.
Yep.
A lesser known fact, however, about Isha is that she studied architecture as her majors in the same college where I completed my Bachelor of Architecture from in Mumbai. And that's where we got our conversation going. Right, Andy?
Yeah, that's how we started.
Yeah. What did you think about the conversation with Isha?
I found it very, very helpful also for us to reflect on our background as architects, especially because of the way she spoke about her basic foundational study of architecture and how she feels very, very importantly that it has informed her perspective and the way she looks at technology products. And it has constantly helped her throughout her growth as a professional in tech.
I think what the point that she really drove home is how design is so innately multidisciplinary, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's really well put. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, well, without keeping our audience any further, let's get right into this conversation with Isha Bhatt. As always, the conversation will be released in 2 parts. Please like, share, subscribe, and most importantly, let us know what you think. Hi. So let's start with the fact that you are from the first batch that graduated from the same school where I studied architecture, that is the Kamlareja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture. And then you moved to the US, did your master's, and worked in big tech for 20 years. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting to touch upon being the first batch because
Yeah.
a lot to do with being the first batch. When we started college, the building was a little bit under construction as well. We had classrooms with desks, but we had to figure out every single thing in the classroom. And I've seen the college now, it's amazing, but we pretty much had 2 or 3 studio rooms and that's it, and bathrooms.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because we had professors who were figuring out the curriculum. We had, of course, Sen Kapadia, who was the brain behind everything. And at that point, since we were the first batch, he had so much liberty and so much that he could do with us. So we had projects that were just out of the world and it didn't have precedence to follow.
Right.
Yeah.
Which gave us a lot of creativity. It pushed us to think beyond boundaries. And almost together with the professors, we were creating that curriculum or the foundation for the upcoming batches. And then when I translate that experience to my career, I almost feel that that foundation of creativity, the foundation of setting a precedence, creating the curriculum, working hand in hand with the professors, gives you so much of depth and allows you to explore yourself beyond just the architecture curriculum. It's organization, it's teaching, it's leading. And that spirit of that is something that has stayed with me and that has enabled me to change different roles, take on different roles, but having that strong foundation of creativity and problem solving.
Yeah, it sounds also like a like not a crash course, but a really foundational course on how to conceptualize not just architectural projects, but curriculum and how to direct yourself, sort of, right?
Exactly.
Which would then lead to a very strong leadership.
Sure. And I'll tell you some simple things which are funny, but typically we had friends in JJ or Rachna or Raheja, and something as simple as glass tracing in those days, you learn from your seniors. And we didn't have anyone to even tell us about that. So we never did that for quite some time till someone figured out from their friend at those colleges that you could trace construction sheets.
Right.
So-
tracing. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's the underground
probably that
scene
doesn't
of
exist.
architecture schools in India.
Yeah. So when you are making models, the different materials that you use. If you have seniors, you see their projects, and then you can kind of figure out you're using balsa wood or cardboard or all these other things. But we didn't have anyone to learn from. So it was a lot of it that we just had to figure out. And we didn't have the internet either at that point. This was 20 years ago, probably 22 years ago. And it was all self-discovery and discovering together as a team, as a group. To your point about how it kind of helps you with leadership is two things. One is you're leading yourself. And the second is, as the next batches started coming in, we almost felt this responsibility of leading the other batches because we missed out on that leadership that we could get from our seniors. So it was a good learning. It was an amazing experience.
But then what was the library like? Did you have one already?
Yeah, we had a library. Literally, there were 3 or 4 cupboards with books.
Okay.
Not much.
But I'm sure Sen Kapadia must have been really, really picky with whatever his resources were and very, very sharp in his curation of the library.
Yes. And we got a lot of books that he I think we had a budget and he was very good with getting the books. But the absence of the library made up with, we had one-on-one time with him. He spent hours with us. He took us to his projects. He worked with us, and similarly with every single professor. We were the only batch, so we had all the attention, and we could really what was nice was we could learn about the stories and their careers and how they got to where they were, which was really interesting, which in a regular school, you don't have that much time with the professors.
How many students were there in the same batch at that time? Like
44.
40. Okay.
40 to 44.
Yeah.
That's more than my batch, actually.
Nice. Is it?
For some reason, mine had 35.
And interestingly enough, we had 28 girls.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's continued. My class had 12 boys or something like. We've always, I think, across my time of study also, we've always known that there were more girls across colleges in Bombay, at least.
Okay, so then we come to your time in the US. How does this entire... how do you start in...
Wait, so you graduated from KRVIA.
Yeah.
What happened then?
Oh, yeah, actually. What happened then?
So and then I was working with Nozer Vadia Associates for a couple of years. And that was just mind-blowing. I don't know if any of you have seen his work. At least when I was working with him, he was into designing a lot of homes in Alibag. And some of the clients had commissioned him to do these amazing houses, which were organic, free-form.
Right.
And it was a very similar experience for me, where it was pushing the boundaries of the norms.
Right. Very experimental.
A lot of experimentation. We had a project where the client said, I don't want to cut any single tree. There were like 40 coconut trees. It was a farm plot. And he said, I don't want to cut any single tree, build the house around the trees.
Yeah.
So working through that, pouring concrete on every single wall that is a curved wall was fascinating. And as a young graduate, you're like, oh my God, like I never even thought this could be possible. You know, you're
Yeah.
always worried about structure and what if the tree falls and trying to be safe.
Yeah, this is
But
good
this was
sustainability before sustainability was a thing.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Totally.
it was another thing where it was, you know, there's nothing wrong. You cannot fail, and it's okay to fail.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So those were the things that they get started when you're working at sort of Nozarvadia.
Did you make
Yeah.
working drawings?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
a lot
wow.
of working drawings, a lot of drafting.
Yeah.
Nice.
Fun
Oh,
fact.
hand drafting.
Yeah,
Oh,
hand
wow.
drafting. It was all
Yeah.
hand drafting, no
Yeah.
computers.
Ah, okay.
This is where the generation gap hits us.
Yeah.
Yes.
uh,
And probably I'm aging myself too.
No, you look great.
Yeah. So then you worked at Nozarvadia for how long? How many years was it?
I think it was the internship, the last 6 months when you're
Okay.
doing architecture, and probably another year or so.
Okay, so that was all right, about that much time. And then, as per your profile, it reads that then you did your master's in industrial design in the US.
Yeah.
And what was why would you choose industrial design from doing after finishing
Yeah, so that's
architecture?
working with Nozer, it was really interesting because he paid attention to detail
Mhm.
and to every single thing that they did. Like furniture, a lot of times you'd be like, I'm going to design the own furniture. I'm going to do doorknobs, like
Yeah.
very picky and very detail oriented. And
Mhm.
industrial design, in my mind, was a path to kind of get to the next level where you could do your building, but at the
Mhm.
same time, you can go deeper into product design. So
Yeah.
the goal was to start doing product design. So it's more of an inclusive
Yeah.
experience that I thought, I could provide.
Yeah, it's like
So
a
it's
holistic
architecture plus
idea of
product
design.
Yeah.
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 And
And
go ahead.
little did I know that when I joined this program, there were so many facets. And this is again like in 98. So
Mhm.
there were so many facets that I wasn't aware of growing up in
Mhm.
India.
Mhm.
There's exhibit design, there's graphic design, there's interaction design,
Yeah.
signage.
Yeah.
And that was just like, there's so many possibilities.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And again, coming back to architecture, having that strong architecture education, which I think right now, yes, we spend a lot of time, but it's a little bit underrated. People don't realize what it gives you.
Mhm.
And I can talk a little bit more about that later on. But having that education, I was like, anything is possible as
Yeah.
long as you have the concepts of design,
Yeah.
problem solving, and you understand your customer needs. Any of these fields that you saw would be open to all of us.
Yeah. Because I think after that you start working at Rediff as your first job right out of industrial design,
Yeah.
which is a website. And like you just mentioned, that once you understand what is design all about or how you can design, the possibilities are endless. So do you want to walk us through a little bit of what the whole Rediff project was like what were you
Sure.
doing there?
Yeah. So that was a little bit of an accident because I was not ready to move back to India yet.
Okay.
And no architecture firm was ready to sponsor my H1.
Okay.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it was a
Yeah.
little bit of a
Yeah.
visa issue. And
Mhm.
I was like, okay, what can I do so that I can make some money and continue staying here?
Okay.
And at some point, I'll get back to architecture, which never happened.
Yeah.
But so, as I said, through my master's, I had picked up a lot of skills on graphic design, like Photoshop, Illustrator, and had worked as some side gigs just to make some money on the side on websites. And that
Mhm.
was also when the internet was just kind of going crazy. in about 2000.
Yeah.
So I got a job at Rediff. The goal was to be their graphic designer and their web designer, designing their website. And it was interesting, like we were moving from newspapers, which you actually physically held, to digital.
Yes, absolutely.
And so the challenge was, how can you get all of this information, like the front page of the newspaper, on that website page?
Yeah.
And I don't know, you probably don't remember or know about this, but there was also, how do you monetize it?
Yeah.
Like, who's going to pay for this website? So then all these flashy banner ads and advertisements started on the internet. So it was nice, a very interesting project to figure out, how do you get the news to the users or the readers and monetize it and have enough dignity with the ads that you're placing,
right?
So that it's not intrusive.
Yeah.
And then with that comes a lot of things that, again, kind of drawing parallels with industrial design and architecture, is who are your users? Because when you start looking at the users and the audience, you start breaking them into different demographics or different segments. And you see the users who live in the US who have faster internet. The users who are accessing it from India, because Rediff is an Indian site. And then the internet is really slow. So the time that the site takes to load, like, you don't want the person to just close the browser and go away. So you want that reader. And also the kinds of information, like how do you place the information, the hierarchy of information,
right?
So that you can divert the users to the information that they're looking for easily and have more of their time on the website. So very similar principles, but this was the first time I was moving from the offline design principles and translating them to online. And then the whole aspect of accessibility also comes in, about the contrast, white text on black background or black text on white background. And how can you make users who are lesser abled or who cannot hear or visually impaired, how can you still make them or offer them a news site, which is quite fundamental?
Did you have... I'm just curious, were Rediff surprised that there's an architect at our doorstep asking for a job?
Yeah, so, and this is throughout my career, is like, okay, you're an architect. What are you doing in software? Like, why are you, like, how does this even work?
Yeah.
So I think there are a few things. And I think this is, again, very, very underrated. When I was thinking about it, if you see software, now there's a role, software architect.
Right.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? That means the person who is the mastermind of the technology, mastermind, and you really call it an architecture blueprint. That's the word that we use when you create a blueprint for a product. And so it's almost translated. And that kind of tells you the importance of the role of an architect, because you are the mastermind of the building or house or interiors, whatever you're designing. You're looking at every single aspect of it. And when it translates to digital or software, it's very similar. So and then also, as I said, design and problem solving and organizing information, hierarchy of information, all of those are very fundamental concepts that we've learned and we've mastered. So it was quite easy for me to translate that into the digital world. But that question always comes up.
It's I'm guessing you're always ready with an explanation about how conceptually they're similar. And
I had to plan that, because otherwise it wasn't easy for me to get a job.
Yeah. And it almost sounds spatial in a way. I mean, of course, a physical newspaper has its own way of being used, but once you go into the digital links, how are they going to open, and how that space is going to show up while it loads, and all of that. It sounds very spatial.
No, I also think it's a time where so a lot of us were just breaking into teenage at that point of time. So Rediff Mail was our first email IDs with all those very weird
Exactly.
football genius at rediffmail.com, I don't know, and some
Right.
weird kind of names. But I think it's also that time when you are working on the back end of something which doesn't have, again, a precedence, like
Yes.
within your architecture education there has been no precedence. And then within Rediff Mail also, because I mean, yes, they started the website, but I think there must have been many first time problems that were arriving, no, like many first times, like, oh, this is the first time that we have to figure out
video embedding or
video
something.
embedding
I
into
don't know.
the website. This is
Of
the
course,
first time.
we are novices to
Totally.
this.
Yeah. Or GIFs.
Yeah.
Animated GIFs. And how do we reduce the load of it? And how do we let it render faster?
Yeah.
So that becomes your kind of foundation into tech, your time at Revit. And then we see... Rediff, sorry.
Yeah.
Did I say Reddit?
Revit, yeah. It's okay.
Revit?
Yeah, it's all right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a weekday, guys.
It's okay.
We're still in a zone. But what I wanted to really say is, and then from there, let me put it this way. It sounds also to be a time where the only other really global thing is Hollywood in terms of culturally understanding. Of course, internet wasn't a cultural object per se back then, so it wasn't on all the continents, it wasn't as ubiquitous as it is today, but the only other global thing before that was let's say Hollywood, where every corner, the Kite Runner mentions John Wayne movies. So from that you move into something that is for the first time a public platform that is a global bank that each person can access. Not a bank, but a sort of money handling thing system that each person can access from their home. What was that like? Did it feel like you were working somewhere that is actually going to be as big as it is now, or?
That's PayPal,
So
right?
I started with eBay first
Okay.
for a very short time. And that was a dream for me because, you see this marketplace, the first marketplace, and you're like, oh my God, like, how does this happen? How do they connect thousands of buyers and sellers on like antiques and goods? And it's almost like this culmination of what we were used to in the bazaar in India. And this is all online. And like, how do they do it?
Yeah.
So I joined them. And at that point, what we were working on is kind of a search engine for products. So you could search for Nikon D40 and we would show you images, user reviews, everything possible, similar to what Amazon is today, kind of. But it was supposed to be a search engine. And that's what I was hired for. And when I went for the interview, honestly, I did not think I would even get the job because I had nothing. I mean, I had just worked at Rediff for 1 or 2 years. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get this job doing a search engine. And I got the job. Before, when I drove home, they called me. I was in the car and they're like, yeah, let's talk about the next steps and when can you start? So it was super cool to kind of get into that. And then that's when actually I would say officially onboarding into the tech world started. Because I mean, yes, Rediff was technology, but this is where I was working with like search scientists and scientists who were trying to figure out the algorithm of how do you
optimize
how do you optimize a search engine and how do you build a search engine. And I would say I was the only designer on that team. Everyone was an engineer. And which was really interesting because I brought a lot of value from the design perspective, but for me personally was just like absorbing all of this data and the knowledge that they were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I moved on to PayPal, which was again a slightly different space as in the financial space.
Yeah.
But at that point, I transitioned into product management.
Oh, okay.
And which is interesting because till date, if I have to explain to my parents what does product management mean, they will not get it. They're like, what is your product? Because it's abstract, right? Like when you say you're a product manager for a website or a product or an app,
yeah,
the question is, what do you do?
Yeah.
And product management is not a discipline that is taught in any school or college. You see product managers coming in from all kinds of backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
Engineering is a lot of them, but business, analytics. So you see, it's a community that's very diverse from their background perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And as a role, there are a lot of times we define that role as the CEO of the product. So the buck stops at you. You're figuring out what gets shipped to the end user. Sometimes people even say you're the curator of the art gallery because you're curating the product and you're getting it ready to be displayed.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different ways you could describe product management, but that's when I kind of at PayPal I started doing product management, and it was interesting because if you see kind of from graphic designer to user interface designer to product management, what I was aiming to do was, or my ambition was, to get a more holistic perspective of the end product. So as a graphic designer, you're just working on the graphics. Of course, you're part of a lot of conversations, but the accountability is you're responsible for the design work.
Yeah.
As a user interface or user interaction designer, you're working with the engineers and the graphic designer to determine how should things behave and how should things work when users interact with it. And then as a product manager, you're looking at all of these disciplines, and you're the one understanding the user requirements, understanding the business requirements, and translating all of that to your designers and engineers and launching that product. And then you're working with the analysts to figure out, how is the product working? Is it successful? Is it not successful? Is it meeting the business metrics? What else can we do? And that role, again, it's very similar to being an architect because you're the one who's talking to the client, right? That are your users. What do you want? What is your dream house or dream building? And what do you want to get out of it?
Yeah.
Who's going to use it? How?
Yeah.
Right.
And then you kind of translate those requirements into your concept sketches or your drawings. And then kind of you work with all the services to kind of ensure that that vision or that dream comes to life.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what my job was.
And there seems to be also a parallel between so we often, even today, even with how much information is available to learn, we're sort of always, as architects, superficially familiar with everything, right? A client shows up and says, I need a house. Okay, we're going to kind of learn about your lifestyle. Another client shows up and says, I need you to design a bank. And I'm like, okay, we're going to try and learn a little bit about how a bank works and what you need. And everything is like from a distance. But I have a feeling, and I'm sorry, I completely missed eBay when I asked you the question, but it's really important here that you're learning a new kind of retail and a new kind of, maybe not finance, but a new kind of fintech, right? Financial technology. And I just wanted to ask, how deep do you have to go from the surface in the digital world?
Yeah.
Because in the physical, we know very well we have to take care of the walls and the desks and the paint and, yes, of course, the aesthetics, the effects. the functioning, all the other aspects. But we never have to worry about whether this bank is going to make a loss because of us, because that's probably, at least not directly,
Right.
But
Right.
you kind of have to. And how much deeper are you going from the surface then in that case?
So I would say domain knowledge is very important. It is really important to understand how things work, because as you said, the risk is very high.
Right.
And also, the risk is really high because it all happens in a fraction of a second. Like a fraud can happen and it's the end of it.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, you need to be extra cautious and you need to kind of go really deep. But the good part is that there are enough specialists who you can work with and enough technical people who you can work with. What you need to know is, what do you need to ask for?
Okay.
What are the questions you need to ask? So risk, details on, let's say, money movement, or with the technicalities. You need to kind of really kind of understand it at the core level to be able to design. The good part is, with digital, there is experimentation. So at PayPal at one time, we had 20, 30, maybe even more experiments running in each country.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you can actually see how users are reacting and using what you have built.
Yeah.
And if it's working as anticipated or not, and change it.
Almost live.
Yeah.
Yeah, live, in real time.
Everything is in real time.
So that is the beauty of it. And of course, you kind of, the way it's very sophisticated. But when we started with it, first you start with focus groups. So you kind of really try and understand a wide variety of users, what's important to them, what's not important to them, and distill that information. Then we would draw mocks, similar to making models, and actually they weren't working, but they were just like screenshots or images. And then we'd bring users and ask them to react to it. And simple things like, look at this page, the home page, let's say for Rediff or any other site, take the page down. What do you remember? So then that tells you things that you wanted them to see. Is it on top of mind or not? Or have you missed something in your design? Then you built a working prototype, just a click through. And then we ask them to kind of click through and see if the most common path that you would expect the users to take through is working and they're not failing at that task. For example, it's create an account.
Yeah.
Is it easy enough for even a 50-year-old or 80-year-old grandma to create that account? So these are all offline things. And then when you kind of really go live, there's so many permutations, combinations that you can test. So I would say, so that's one part. Now, coming back to your question, the other thing is, when you design a bank or a library, you really need to do so much research into cataloging. Like you don't know how a library is cataloged. You really need to figure out, how will it be cataloged? How will people check out? Like now, checkout is just scanning a barcode. Like, where should I be placing the barcodes? What is the norm? What is the speed at which the checkout should work? How many people check out in an hour, in 10 minutes? What are the peak times? Is there enough space for so many people to stand here and check out? If they need help, who are they going to call? So you're actually thinking through all of that, even when you're building a building.
Right.
Yeah.
So
kind of,
and then you kind of look at library experts or bank experts, and you really sit down and talk through them. With a bank, you're really kind of thinking about security, like safe deposit vault. Like it should be at the last corner of the building, or there might be specialists who've just designed that. Right? So you do bring in all these folks. The only difference with digital is all of them are sitting around you.
Yeah.
And they are sort of, they're and that's That's quite a change across
Yeah. No,
industries, I
Totally.
guess.
yeah. And I think actually, you mentioned that when you started working at eBay or at PayPal, one of these two, actually eBay, you said that for you it was, yes, you entered there as the only designer in this team, whereas there were all these experts around you. And for you, it was like a space where you were like, oh, I need to absorb so much and try to get so many ideas. But I am pretty sure that even, I mean, the reverse was also true, no? Like when you say, like when you are the only designer, I'm pretty sure those people
Yeah.
are also on a day-to-day basis getting surprised. Like, oh, there's someone telling us that this banner should not come here because it's not going to attract enough attention the way we
Or
want it,
behavior.
or
Yeah.
behavior, and
Yes.
all those, analyzing those things.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, when we have such technical experts, what is it that they don't sort of think about when it comes to designing of things, or just the
Yeah.
appearance of things? Because there is so much that they're doing at the back. And
Right.
yeah.
Right. And so I think there's a book, Inmates Are Running the Asylum.
Okay.
It's a very old book, but that is where it was referring to engineers, of course, with all due respect to engineers
Yeah.
who were trying to design.
Mhm.
And when engineers are trying to design, of course, they're trying to make the product technically so superior, but so that it's like geeked out product. But from a user perspective, unless you understand all those nuances, you might not be able to use it the best.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I have a very good friend. I'm not going to name anyone, but we were designing a payment thing, and I would be like, it's about the CVV number.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know
Yeah.
if you guys know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now, of course, everyone knows what it is. But at that point, we just had a field, enter CVV number. And I was like, who would know what is CVV? Like, we have to show a diagram and show how do we enter the information.
Where do you find it?
Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's no one's going to know about it. And we had such a long debate about it, such a small thing. But I was like, I insisted that we have to show a graphic image.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Wow. That's
And then I think the other big thing is, design is very subjective. It's very subjective because it's how each one perceives the space or each one perceives a visual. So a lot of people scan, a lot of people are looking at details. And the best thing I thought was, yes, there are guiding principles that we follow, but then getting user testing and getting users to actually react to it
Mhm.
and get more data was the fastest and the quickest way to move forward.
Yeah. I think also you mentioned working at PayPal, and then you moved to working at Volvo shortly after. This is how we read it is that it is a move from a digital space to a sort of physical space. No, the cars have to be actually produced and things. So. But I also feel that something like PayPal has a lot of physical aspects to it, like the fiber optic cable, for instance, that it has to be, you said, no, there were these experiments happening. This is also the time when the internet is actually being set up, no, because it's actually being sent to every part of the world and things. What was that negotiation like, or was there something around it that was that you can highlight in terms of the digital space itself? But it was, you can say, like it had such physical boundaries, or like there were these things that were catching it. The digital was not a boundless space. You know what I'm trying to say, in a way?
Yeah. So not so much. I mean, there are a lot of specialists who actually do that.
Yeah.
But things like when we are launching a campaign and we're actually looking at the server space,
Yeah.
like how many users can we have at a time?
Yeah.
And when we launch campaigns, like we launched a Super Bowl campaign, and we were all monitoring, and we had to make sure that we could take the load of the number of users coming in.
Yeah.
So we had to deal with that, but there are a lot of technical folks that actually deal with that. not so much of the physical space. The physical space that we have to think about with PayPal is if you wanted to connect your phone at a store and allow you to transact just by scanning a code and then walk off. So how would that work? And think about all the cases where if it goes through, if it doesn't go through, the line gets backed up. And where should we have these machines? So a lot of physicality in store.
Right.
Right.
It works as a completely different ecosystem because on one hand, it seems as if we brought up Volvo, but the simplest analogy is if you basically produce too many cars, you have a storage problem, right?
Yeah.
And you don't generate the right sales, you have a storage problem. But with the digital, you squeeze that problem and you've sort of really reduced the real estate problem, because I think server farms can be expanded, especially if the internet originates in the US and there's a lot of empty land and it's a pretty big country. How have you seen this, not just metaphysically, but how do you see this difference? Because let's say as a foundation, you trained about the real world, and from this we want to go into your work at Volvo, sort of, especially with data. But how do you see this after 20 years of being in this field, almost 20 years at least before Volvo? And how do you see this difference? Because in human history, this is quite a big deal to move everything onto, let's say, the clouds, as we call it today. How do you see this shift?
It's very interesting. I think it's happened pretty fast as well. Like when you see the evolution of technology and stuff, like when you think about cars, to get to the first car, it took quite some time. There's an evolution.
Right.
And now when you think about since when we all know about the internet till what we can do on the internet now.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to step out of your house. You don't need to do anything physically. Everything can happen with clicks on your app or your phone. So that has been really, like, it's fast, and I think the next generation, and probably you guys are some of them, is the adoption to that is very seamless. It's almost like the next generations are wired to be that way. And the one thing that we didn't talk about, but it's interesting, is through the last few years on the internet, on the digital space, initially culture played a big role. Culture and the way people perceive things. So I had seen this study at IIT where this is right in the beginning of the internet. If you remember, there was an hourglass that would load.
Right.
It would go back and forth.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a sign that things are loading. And someone had done this similar experiment with some kids in Mumbai. And they thought it was a damru. They said damru baj raha hai or something. And it was just eye-opening to see how things that you designed for are perceived. Or understanding the problems of different cultures. So even at PayPal, when we were designing for, like, it's a global company, we're designing for a lot of countries. The way transmittance or remittance works in some of the smaller towns of LATAM is very different, where people have to take a bus to get that money. And then if you have the OTP or something that is messed up, you spend your whole day that you've taken off from your farm or wherever. You have to go back and come back again. And that is huge. That is crazy. Or if you think about India and China, a lot of folks in India and China don't have an email address, but they have a phone number. So I mean, they have the whole concept of having an email inbox is just past
Yeah.
because they've just used their phones and WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So things are moving at a different pace, and in different countries, people are using technology so differently to their convenience.
Mhm.
And a few years ago, it was like, things come from the West, and that's where the innovation happens. That's where things are kind of on the leading front. But now, when you see some of these developing countries, there's so much innovation and creativity because maybe a gap, or maybe that's what's enabled for them.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Like the whole innovation happening on the phones in India is crazy. Like,
Both software and hardware. Oh?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you don't need to buy $1,000 phone. You can buy a simpler phone or whatever, and you can do everything on that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's easy, or so maybe it's easy enough for everyone to use it, or everyone has figured out how to
Mhm.
make it work for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which in like it was harder to get people to use Hotmail or Yahoo Mail or anyone at some point. But think about the phone. It's a computer on your fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And pretty much everyone has it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of moved. So there are obviously a range of scales at which the digital world affects societies, right? Like somebody losing a whole day because of an OTP mishap, while somebody not being able to access a whole financial ecosystem because they never heard of an email address, but they manage almost a very wide range of activities on their cellular devices, right?
Totally.
And this world, when what I want to point at is something very interesting that you mentioned, that there was this clear sender receiver relationship between the West and large parts of the world, whether it's the emerging economies or even to some extent here in Europe. A lot of stuff just was coming straight from North America. It wasn't being worked upon here in the way that it was being worked upon in Silicon Valley. I can't think of a quick Silicon Valley comparison here in Europe either. A real place where such stuff happens. Now, in this relationship of the sender receiver now sort of being muddied and disturbed, where locally people are taking care of some of their own issues, if cell phones are too expensive, somebody comes up with one that's cheaper and can be bought by the locals, and this is happening all over the world. How do you see, because this is a little bit about Volvo, your work at Volvo as a chief data officer there, how do you see the data that Volvo receives from the source is the car, right? Any usage statistics, or if it's research about the real world for self-driving cars, whatever data is being recorded or received by Volvo, how does it then see it? Because it may not be able to predict an innovation in how roads might be designed in, let's say, Pune in 5 years. It cannot predict that, but it's probably looking at it, right? Or is it?
Yes. Yeah. So my transition to Volvo was to start an e-commerce product for them, where we wanted to. The product's already live. It's called Care by Volvo. It's a subscription for a car. So just like a Netflix subscription, you can subscribe to a car month to month, all included, your insurance, service, everything. And no questions asked. You can go and return it at the end of your subscription. In some countries, actually in Germany, it's doing really well. It's probably we've come down to 3 months subscription. We started with a year or 3 years based on the country, and now we've come down to 3 months. And it's working really well. And again, it was interesting because we wanted to launch this subscription for the urban population, and thinking that it'll be, that was a hypothesis, But now when you kind of think about it, people in urban areas don't want cars.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's an ongoing evolution. And then I moved on to doing leading the data team.
Mm-hmm.
And to your question about how all this data is being collected, so think about it as now each car is a computer
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
that's traveling hundreds of miles per month.
Mm-hmm.
And we are collecting all this data. So there are a few challenges to kind of think about what is the right data to collect
Mm-hmm.
and why to collect. And so to begin with, of course, safety is a big part, especially for a company like Volvo. So any data with collision that helps with safety is going to be
Mm-hmm.
prioritized to ensure that the cars are safe. Second is, of course, the ambition to be autonomous. So then we are collecting data to kind of, or having algorithms for the car to understand through the cameras, objects and spaces around them, to be able to figure out how can we train the machine to be autonomous.
Mm-hmm.
And as we kind of get further out into autonomous driving, I think that is going to influence the planning of cities
Yeah.
a lot,
Mm-hmm.
both in terms of the scale, like how wide should a road be or how narrow should it be, because now it's all autonomous and the room for errors is the precision is
Very
high.
low. Yeah. Precision is
Yeah.
high.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then maybe it's okay to have more space for sidewalks, or maybe there's a bike lane, or the levels between the bike lane, the sidewalk, and the street have to be a certain height. So it's intuitive enough for the car to understand not to go there, so that the camera can see the depth. Or even so that is the physical aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other big aspect that I think will change is the aspect of traffic lights and signals and technology around that, because right now, you know how you have synchronized traffic lights and a lot of that. With more information coming from the cars,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the traffic patterns could become more consistent, and that could evolve as well.
With artificial intelligence.
Yeah. And so also, I mean, the vision at most car companies have, and this is kind of really cool, is each car becomes a computer, or it will be a computer
Mm-hmm.
that's sharing information back so that things can be safer and you can be autonomous. But then each car will be sharing information with other cars. So like car sourcing.
Constantly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just like crowdsourcing, they're sharing data with each other to predict, oh, there's snow. But I mean, the information takes time to come in, because there are like 10 cars ahead of me and they've predicted a storm 100 miles from here. And I'm getting that signal. So I'm going to figure out a different route to go, or I'm not going to go. So a lot of that is going to change, and it's going to become pretty mechanical at some point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The one thing that we are realizing with this is really interesting is, as a lot of this information is coming in, and when you think about biases on that. So with autonomous driving, there was a research that happened, and to figure out when people are crossing the road, kind of gauging the depth, height, speed, and then training the car to avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
So the test happened with average sized human beings. It was fine. The minute there was a shorter person or a taller person or a dog, the car could not understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And then take it a step further. A lot of these tests had happened on white people.
Okay.
So the perception was different when there was a black person crossing the road. And no one had thought about it, because the folks who were training the model were all white. And the folks who were part of the experiment were all white. So these are biases that they've kind of come through digital for the longest time. Like when you think about the innovation of the mouse, the right-click mouse was invented first. No one thought about a left-click mouse. And then they were like, oh yeah, what do left-handers you do? And then we kind of thought about. So just it depends on who's designing. So with autonomous driving, now when we're testing at a larger scale, we are realizing the biases that were built in when the technology had just started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's also very interesting that it's like this sort of, a baby taking its step, it's stumbling, because you say that there is experiments happening in 20 or 30 different countries at the same time, trying to understand a particular culture, and then how this particular product, whatever it may be, the car, the PayPal product, or whatever, that has to get adapted to that particular culture. And then at the same time, you look at it and you see this sort of gaze of like who's actually designing it, and then these kind of failures that happen. I wouldn't call them failures, but I would call them like these new things that you keep learning. Yeah, learnings. What is the thrust of this within tech, within big tech, where how much of market understanding, how much of people understanding, how much of cultural understanding does it do? Because
it's a lot, and it's just going to get more and more, and that's the one reason why diversity and inclusion is so important.
Yeah,
because everyone is realizing the more diverse people we have, and this is way beyond gender. It's about your tradition, your culture, how you think, what's your educational background, what's your sexual orientation, just every single thing, because then you're thinking about, or you're being inclusive in design about everyone who's going to be using.
Yeah.
And at the scale at which some of these products are going to be used, you need that. You just need that diversity, so you have voices of different people talking about the experiences, but also in the design phase, when you're kind of sharing designs, it's important for people to think from the left brain and right brain and the individual experiences to really make that design strong and usable, right? Like the end goal is, how can this be a very usable product?
Yeah.
Right.
But what kind of expertise does big tech look at when it comes to getting its information about culture? Do you have anthropologists on your team?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's that. There is a lot of in-country teams that are looking at how do people use certain things. And I don't remember any examples, but there were ways in which you take a product to a country and they would use it completely differently. Like that Damru example was one.
Right.
Yeah.
Where you could not imagine how people would use it. I think another way to kind of think about it is when you think of the music genre, the one in Gully Boy.
Rap, hip hop and rap.
Sorry, yes, I was completely blanking out. Yeah, the way rap is being used by the masses in India. Like, we didn't think about that, but it's there everywhere.
Yeah.
So people are using different things in a very personalized way. And I think that's another area where a lot of big tech is looking at personalization. So even for cars, simple personalization like seat height and seat length and all of that is fine. But when you start connecting your phones and your car becomes your office and it's just a machine, how can the dash be personalized to you, or the screen be personalized to you, or your spouse or your child sitting? And how can you have that comfort of, it's personalized for me?
Yeah.
I think we are also asking this. I think Chirag's question was really important also because we, as usual, as architects, we are the last to go somewhere, right? We're the last to begin using software. We're the last to figure out even social reform or labor reforms within our fields. The last people who are going to make sure every construction worker has hats, and
Yes.
there are controversies about the Qatar World Cup where people are dying and all of that.
Yeah.
And with data, and especially the kind that you have worked with, I think Chirag and I often talk about, do we really know our cities? We know everything in fragments, right?
Yeah.
We don't have, unless, is there another way except for fitting sensors in every damn building in the world? Is there another way to know our cities? And this, to us, is very interesting, that big tech is receiving all kinds of data.
Yes.
That goes across scales. You're picking up data on street usage, on traffic.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there's someone at Tesla saying we cannot launch in Mumbai very easily, at least not the version that has a certain lower range of drivability, because the traffic jams will kill the car. Or, the slow moving traffic, the guy probably doesn't get home every evening. And the battery breaks down. And this kind of data is being concentrated. So I'll get to my question also. I mean, I just wanted to sort of clarify how we are coming to you with this. Is it, how much of it is, going back to Chirag's question, how much of it is institutional? Because that is something, let's say, as Indians, or even in this ecosystem, there are, of course, institutions of great repute in Europe, also in India. But how much are universities, American universities, still playing a part that is very, very direct? Or are you waiting for these brilliant graduates to first graduate and then you pick them up? Or, I don't know, like all the famous but really anecdotal stories about, all the geniuses drop out of university. Are you making them drop out? Or like these minds, how does it work? Are you working with university groups and research think tanks within institutions? Because that's an ecosystem that the US is far ahead. Flat. Like there is no comparison anywhere in terms of innovation. And people almost always underestimate how important that part is, because it's not just about a genius mind, but you're going to need a lot of people, a lot of infrastructure that can be, let's say, democratized, can be a public good. How does that work from the tech
work
perspective?
with a lot of universities for some of these projects. And a lot of these projects are thesis projects, or projects that the students have come up with. And they sound like really good ideas. I'm like, okay, we'll help you, and we'll partner with you, and we'll share information and bring you in the wings to kind of get this project out. And then if it works, we kind of share the knowledge and kind of take it forward. In the US, on the cities, there's a lot of stuff going on, because earlier they were saying we'll be autonomous by 2020 or 2025. Now we are pushing it out 10 more years or 5 more years till 2030.
Okay.
Because the infrastructure is not ready to receive it. So from an infrastructure perspective, the government is actively working on what would cities mean when everything is autonomous. Like, what do we need in the city?
Okay.
And yes, when the traffic lights are working, it's fine. If the traffic lights don't work, how will things work if there's no driver sitting in front? So it's a partnership with institutions, colleges, the city, and some of these companies who are pushing technology. On the data side, like when we have sensors in the city and stuff, I think we have enough data. We are collecting enough data, I would say. The cameras every single place, right? Like now there are cameras everywhere. So there's enough data being collected. The challenge is, how do we prioritize this data? How do we understand this data? And how do we bring this data back to the infrastructure in some of the cities like Mumbai to really kick in change or design the city to account for what we are learning
from the data, right?
Yeah. And it'll happen. I mean, I'm quite hopeful because 10 years ago, the way Google Maps worked in Mumbai was a challenge.
Right.
I know making maps work in Indian cities or South Asian cities or even LATAM cities is impossible because it's like, oh, wo mandir ke paas left turn low, right? Like, what's the map going to tell you? But now the maps are pretty accurate. They figured it out. It's taken a while, but they figured it out. So I'm quite hopeful that even with the cities, we'll figure out the data and we'll get the cities to get more organized or whatever our goal is. And I think that's the other thing. Like, I think we have to be clear on what is our goal. What do we want to do with this data? Create more order, create safety, create more green space, recreation areas. So I think with the data, we'd have to kind of figure out what is a priority and then start leveraging that data to solve them.